Alright, now let's look at some engine failure cases. We'll start with an engine failure shortly after liftoff. So we are going to do an immediate re-landing onto the runway because we still have runway remaining. We'll do this takeoff with flaps up because the runway isn't so short. It's a bit less than 800 meters. Mixture is rich because we're below 3,000 feet. The carpet is cold. Engine instruments are checked, so we're ready to go. Now, here in the simulator, I will actually cause the engine failure by pulling the mixture. Of course, in real life, a real airplane, if you want to try something like that with your instructor, it's going to be just the power pull back to idle. Don't want to have a real engine failure. But here in the simulator, it's one of the advantages that we can safely perform such maneuvers. Nothing can happen to us, so I'll actually pull the mixture to make this more realistic. Now, if this happens, an engine failure shortly after liftoff, you don't have much time. So it's probably not really a good idea to then, well, you can't troubleshoot at all of the engine because you only have a few seconds. So it's better to concentrate on the landing. If you have the time, you can extend the flaps to shorten your landing distance, but only if, well, you really have the time for that and the capacity. And anything else like securing the engine, securing the airplane, the master switch and so on, you probably won't have time for that, and it's just distracting. So in this case, I really would recommend you concentrate on the re-landing. Alright, so let's try it. Alright, that was close. So the runway here is, yeah, well, it's not too long, so we barely managed to stop within the perimeter, but we did. So you see how quickly this all happens, and I was prepared to do that this would happen now, so of course it's much easier. I also managed to extend the flaps, but well, if this happens to you in real life, you're not prepared, and of course will be much more difficult to quickly react correctly. So that's why a good departure briefing before takeoff is important. Okay, let's have a look at the replay, and thereafter we'll try out the next engine failure case. Alright, now this time we'll have the engine failure 500 feet above ground. So I'll do a normal takeoff until reaching 3,000 feet MSL. The wind is calm at the moment, so this is also an important factor. If we would have a headwind, that would actually help us. I mean, there's some point where if the headwind is really, really strong, that if you turn back to the airport, it can actually happen because you then have such a strong tailwind that you overshoot the runway in the other direction, but it's not too likely. So the headwind normally is helping you. Now we have calm winds, so let's try that, and have an engine failure at 500 feet above ground. Speed should be 60 knots according to the handbook. And then, of course, if you have the time, you can secure the engine, so pull the mixture, switch the fuel valve off, switch the ignition off, and then after the flaps have extended as required, switch off the master switch. But only do that if you really have the time and capacity. First, priority, as always, should be to fly the aircraft. Fly the aircraft into a safe and controlled touchdown. Anything else is an added bonus. Alright, so wind calm. Let's try the engine failure in 500 feet. Alright, so I will return to the airport now on purpose. I'll try to, just for demonstration. And then we'll see if it was actually a good idea to return to the airport in 500 feet above ground. Okay, and engine fail. Pitch down, 60 knots, turn back. Where's the runway? Okay, there it is. Do you think we're going to make it? Well, I'm not so sure. Keep those 60 knots. Don't try to extend the glide by pitching up, because it will only make things worse. But no, we are not going to make the runway. Extend the flaps now, and at least we'll hit this flat area here. So that's alright. Okay, so we almost made it, but not quite. Now, let's do the same, but with a 10 knots headwind, and see how that helps us. Alright, same situation as before. Engine failure in 500 feet above ground, but this time we have a 10 knots headwind. Takeoff checks are completed, so let's go. Now we'll have a lower ground speed because of the headwind, so we'll cover less distance now, and when we return we'll have a tailwind which will increase our gliding distance. Let's see if that helps. And engine fail. So 60 knots, turning back again. We're now turning into a tailwind. Yep, we should be able to make the runway. Don't use the flaps just yet to really be sure. Yes, that's fine. So I'll extend the flaps. Alright. So this time we made it. I think you've seen a difference between a headwind and no wind. So always be aware of your wind when you're taking off. And if there's any doubt, it's always better after an engine failure after takeoff to simply land straight ahead. So it's also, of course, very helpful if you are aware of the terrain in your departure sector and you know where the best spots would be for that emergency landing. So let's try this out. Let's take off with a bit of a tailwind and then have an engine failure in 300 feet. Alright, takeoff checks complete, so let's go. We have a slight tailwind now of maybe 5 knots. So not a good idea to return back to the airport. And we'll have an engine failure now in 300 feet, so it should be very clear to us then to continue straight ahead. Engine fail, pitch down, 60 knots. Okay, flaps as required. Yeah, that's looking quite good. Straight ahead, it's a clear field. No trees. Looking good. And we'll just land here. Bit of an upslope. Okay, so we landed straight ahead. We had no obstacles, of course, this is not always the case, but we could do a controlled descent and a controlled touchdown. But if we had returned, we definitely wouldn't have made the runway, and then we would have been very, very low at the end of the turn, so we would have no choice about the terrain, and we would have needed to take anything that was presented to us. So, of course, it was the right decision here to continue straight ahead. All right, this concludes the lesson about engine failures on takeoff. See you in the next lesson.